So in Dell Technologies' view, if we're looking at the market space today, and if we're looking at what the telco service providers are investing on, a lot of it is still around their core business, the access that they provide to the enterprises and to the commercial subscribers, that transformation from or the evolution from 4G to 5G, but also on residential broadband, that whole evolution of bigger broadband speeds, bigger bandwidth for a new society. If you look at our society over the last 10 years, we've gone from content consumption to content creation.
Hello and welcome to this special Telecoms.com podcast. It's actually a podcast series that's produced in partnership with Worldwide Technology. We're going to be talking about the edge, and for this first episode, I'm happy to introduce Daniel Valle, who's the CTO EMEA for Worldwide Technology, and Eric van Vliet, who's the telco go-to-market manager for EMEA for Dell Technologies. Now, I'm not going to talk too much because you're the guys who've got stuff to say and you know what you're talking about. So I'm going to not hesitate before introducing Daniel first, and I'm going to invite you, Daniel, just to take it from the top, to introduce the cloud in this context and tell us a little bit more about what you want to discuss about it.
Thank you, Scott, for having us. We're very happy to be discussing about cloud and what cloud means and how that actually connects to the edge discussions that we in WWT were having with the telco community. As you know, cloud is a big theme on any sort of enterprise and telecom operators. More and more, workloads are being cloudified. The classic IT workloads have been cloudified for years. And now the telco operators are going to a cloudification of their own network. Some of them are more cloudified than others. There's a whole, work taking place from many operators to move these workloads more and more to the cloud. And I think what we want to highlight here is that as these cloud journeys are taking place, more and more, the questions about bringing the workloads and keeping the computing, the cloud capabilities closer to the consumers is, what's the benefit of that, right? And that kind of bringing the workloads closer to who needs it is kind of getting this theme of edge compute, which nothing more than bringing the cloud again closer to the consumers to drive potentially different use cases. You don't want to drive, a different architecture if you're really not taking benefit from that. I think on that front, what WWT is trying to bring to the market here is what does it take for network operators to bring edge computing closer to the customers? As we know, the cloud operators have been in the industry for foreseeable, for a big time in the foreseeable future. They'll still be going to be, important players. The network has been in place for many, many years as well. And it becomes this gray area where, the telcos are hesitant, as we see, and as based on our research and based on our experience, to massively invest on the edge because of that cloud footprint. But equally, the use case that they can uniquely drive because they have the network presence and their capillarity available are also very important. So the report that we created and the things that we're doing in our, Advanced Technology Center are fundamentally to drive the use cases adoption and accelerate the decision making for network operators to really decide where they should go first from an enterprise edge computing support.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about your report in a sec. But first, just what you were saying about this grey area between cloud and the edge seems to sort of typify the evolution that the industry has undergone in the last decade or two. I mean, 20 years ago, there was IT companies and there was telco companies, and there was no real overlap at all between them. But increasingly, that Venn diagram's become more and more overlap. So I guess that's a good opportunity to introduce Eric, who works for Dell Technologies, which we're traditionally considered to be an IT company. But here we are talking to you in the context of telco. So, Eric, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about the edge and how that concerns this overlap that I was just talking about?
Sure, and thanks, Scott, for having me. Basically, now that the cloud is moving towards the edge, that's requirement driven by the new use cases that Daniel will go over, is that the fundamental infrastructure for all those use cases or workloads that deliver those use cases is the same. It's IT style equipment that has to fit at edge locations that are owned by the service providers. And the service providers are in a great position to deliver these services because they own the edge locations. The edge is not new. The edge has been there for many years. And what we as Dell Technologies have now seen, and why you're actually talking to Dell Technologies on this podcast is, for example, is that a lot of the practices, the well-known practices that all the telcos have applied to their operations and in their infrastructure at their core of the network and their traditional data center environment, they're taking that and they need to apply that at the edge. And I'm talking not just about the ability to fit in a physical environment, but also to actually manage all those resources that they're building up at the edge. I think that part is really important to understand, and where Dell Technologies adds a significant value, because we have that experiments with the telcos at the core of the network and the data center, and built that in our products. And we now applying that to also the equipment, or helping the telcos actually deploying similar equipment or equipment that is suitable, made suitable for being positioned and deployed at the edge. And that is where I think Dell Technologies can help the service provider significantly.
And so we've referred a couple of times to a report that WWT has done. So, Daniel, I've got to confess, I've had a quick look at the report, but it's quite comprehensive and I haven't read it from beginning to end. So why don't you just give us a sort of top-line introduction to the report and how it's relevant to this discussion?
I will give you the highlights, but not everything, because I do encourage everyone to have a look at it. Before we explain what's in the context is why we were motivated to actually do that report in the first place. And the reason we were trying to do this report is to get more insights as a company, and also for our customers, on actually where the money is being spent, where the enterprises, and where the people with the vertical knowledge on the different industries will actually what they're doing and how they actually see the edge as a player for their business strategy. So, of course, there's a technology component we're talking about, but it also is a means to create the business outcomes. So the Edge report is a partnership with Analysys Mason, and we interviewed the chief digital officers, the key decision makers on the technical and business landscape, chief operating officers, CTOs. The companies varied from $1 billion annual revenue companies up to $6.7 billion companies. And we focused on the countries that we felt that as WWT, again, go-to-market is focused on in the UK, Germany, USA, and Japan. They, again, very, very strong markets, different landscapes, different geographies, which I think in the edge component is also an interesting thing to bear in mind. And the key verticals that we assessed were the manufacturing, transport, financial services, retail, healthcare, and public sector. So, and the outcome of that report was basically a few things, right, which we can discuss. First of all is these guys are serious about edge. They are actively engaged. They have assigned resources to discuss about how edge actually can change the way they do business and what are the advantages to do that. I think it's a great thing, because if you think about the past when the cloud was getting mature, there was a lot of skepticisms in the industry and a lot of people who actually didn't take that serious enough. And we know what happened with companies that actually did not take cloud serious enough. I think one of the warning signs that we're having with 5G and edge that, fool me once, don't fool me twice, kind of a story, because they are definitely spending resources, assigning people to discuss on how they can actually change the game. And two also kind of highlights that we can introduce as well. In terms of revenue forecasts, based on the numbers we've received in this study that we've done, we're reaching a market of near $17 billion in terms of revenues that we can come up from Edge. And that revenue will be shared from people who are actually generating the business benefits from the platform, but down to the ecosystem of the application layer, the platform layer, the network, and the infrastructure as well. So if you think about a tangible total addressable market on that landscape it reaches about 17 billion. And the other thing that got our attention as well was the fact that 59% of the revenues generated, the 17 billion, will actually reside with the platform players and the application layer. So again, huge market opportunity for the enterprises that are actually studying, developing, and changing the way they're going to consume business. But equally, 40% of 17 billion is not a small number. So I think from a platform provider landscape, it's always extremely compelling to develop and mature how you enable the edge platform to the enterprise, so that you can leverage the benefit out of that. And I think maybe the last highlight I can give is the fact that the research really concluded that they do not see service providers as leading the front of edge from a use case perspective, which we know that we understand the reasoning why. Again, the verticals have not been top of mind for service providers. Service providers are very good on the platform, on the network side. But equally, it is this gray point where we discussed earlier around edge requires computing to be closer to the consumers. Isn't it a good opportunity for telcos to enable new revenue streams, given the fact that despite of 5G, despite of everything that's happening in the industry, people are not paying more for their mobile phones. People are not paying more for connectivity. Connectivity erodes across the years. So creating new revenue streams, I believe, and WWT believe, will be paramount for the success and growth of service providers.
Thanks a lot. That's completely consistent with the kind of stuff that we see from a journalistic point of view. Lots of hype. We were often quite scathing about the hype of 5G, for example, in the last few years. And edge, it strikes me, is at the confluence of so many other buzzwords as well. So you've got 5G, you've got cloud, you've got IoT, which we haven't really mentioned yet, but that's right in the middle of it. One of the reasons you need cloud computing close to the edge is for the kind of low latency services that 5G promises, and which some aspects of IoT will make use of. So yeah, I mean, edge is one of the most buzzy concepts of all, and with the buzz comes that that famous sort of trough of disillusionment prospect. The more something's hyped up, the more it has to live up to. But I get the impression from talking to you guys that we're starting to get there, even if some people have been slow to get the memo. So I would like to just direct back to Eric, and from a Dell perspective, can you give us some reason for optimism, some illustration of how this promise is actually being put into practice in a commercial way?
Sure. So in Dell Technologies' view, if we're looking at the market space today, and if we're looking at what the telco service providers are investing on, a lot of it is still around their core business, the access that they provide to the enterprises and to the commercial subscribers, that transformation or the evolution from 4G to 5G, but also on residential broadband, that whole evolution of bigger broadband speeds, bigger bandwidth for a new society. If you look at our society over the last 10 years, we've gone from content consumption to content creation. I think that has made a significant impact in how the telco service providers are managing their subscribers and the services that they've built around that. And same with the challenges that the service providers are dealing with from the over-the-top providers and let's say the march of software-defined WAN that's coming, is a challenge for them. And if you look at the telco service providers, yes, they are investing heavily on the access, but they've also recognized that while investing heavily on the access and the evolution of that technology that provides the access is driving the general purpose, the standard compute solutions for these workloads. So rather than them having to consider a large number of different more proprietary systems, and more proprietary, it's not general. They actually have the ability, if they choose to deploy more general purpose compute at the edge to provide that access. And by doing that, so they have the ability also to run other use cases that can only run on traditional equipment. And if you now look at the let's say the workloads, the traditional workloads for access, the evolution of the software-defined network, and now also the infrastructure software from companies like VMware or other companies that provide that is growing at such a pace, and the service providers are investing heavily on that portion, all getting ready for the evolution of being able to deploy services that they not always will own. If you look at a topic like Mobile Edge X that Daniel, I'm sure, can talk about, is they creating that environment that will enable not just themselves providing the access, but also providing that environment for these different use cases to actually be stood up close to the subscriber. I think that is really positive news, because without that, it's not feasible for a service provider to own every service they want to offer. There's too much in this new society that we have created in this after the millennium, the last 20 years. There's too much of needs and it's too diverse. So service providers, they're working hard to create an environment that will enable them to cost effectively provide solutions. And there's a business case for them to actually not just be the infrastructure provider for the access, but also the cloud provider at the edge. And I think that's really important to understand, is that is their business model, or that is where they're growing to. And Mobile Edge X, Daniel, maybe you should say a couple of words on that. That's a real good example of what is happening in the telco service provider space.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. Thank you for bringing this up, because if you want to take what you just said and kind of break it down on how we are seeing what we're seeing some of our customers and partners doing, the edge opportunity is broken down in three large blocks. One is the edge application enabler, right? And that will sit with the enterprise. It still sit with the people who understands the verticals they want to try to transform. If you think about the manufacturing companies, if you think about automotive industry, from developing their operations, the OT inside their infrastructure. Definitely, they are the right people to talk about it, because they know how to do it, and they know what the challenge looks like. So the edge application enabler, it's a highly verticalized discussion and requires the understanding of the use cases and the markets. And some companies like Mobile Edge X are actually doing, which is this edge connector kind of application, which is basically how can I help the application developers and the community to access the clouding resources in a very convenient way, and built for the things that Edge was supposed to deliver. Because again, if you're just bringing cloud closer to the consumers and not leveraging the latency and the capacity that actually brings, you're not doing anything fundamentally different, right? 5G, for example, if we want to draw a parallel, people are not getting a better Netflix because you're in 5G. I mean, if it takes 3 seconds or half a second to load your clip, that doesn't change your use case, doesn't change your experience fundamentally. So bringing the edge requires you to drive that sort of better experience to the use case you're trying to achieve. So the edge connectors, that where we feel that companies like Mobile Edge X, which is a partnership that we have in WWT, to really create these pre-built configurations, these pre-built solutions that will connect the hardware infrastructure to that platform enabler program, so developers can actually consume the technology. And the last of the three building blocks would be the platform owner, the location owners of the edge compute, which again we see that the service providers are in a very good position to invest on that kind of opportunity, not only for the fact that they do have the network and they do have the capillarity and the reach, but there are other work streams that we see happening in the market. And again, Scott, maybe you definitely know what's happening in Open RAN, which is, again, is fundamentally creating and disaggregating the radio access networks from the baseband units back to the centralized or kind of central office footprint. There are investments happening today. There are cloud investments happening today, or cloudification initiatives happening today on the radio access networks. And these things are happening already. So the question also to pose is there an opportunity to create economies of scale and emerging different kind of workloads, or different footprints and associate, of course, discrete components, discrete parts of the infrastructure to different players. We know that network functions usually requires a different set of infrastructure, but fundamentally the investments will be there, and I think there could be an opportunity to develop upon them.
Yeah, you guys have summed it up very well and reminded me what a very sort of large and complicated space this has all become. When you're talking about revenue opportunities, historically, the way companies would generate revenue is to have a unique resource and charge for it. But with the cloud, where you've just got so much stuff just thrown into this massive sort of virtual soup that everyone can sort of dip into, and it's not obvious who has ownership of each stage of it and all that sort of thing, it gets a hell of a lot more complicated. And I guess, this leads up to the conclusion of this conversation, and hopefully we'll also introduce the next one we're going to have, which is the concept of partnerships that you both already touched upon. It's so big and so diverse, it's very unlikely that any company is going to have a core competence across every step of the value and the technology chain. So it strikes me that partnerships are actually critical. And before we finish, because we're running short of time, Daniel, I'll put it back to you, and just to sign off with some quick thoughts on the importance of partnerships and how specifically that pertains to telco companies.
Scott, I think you're spot on. Where the journey is going is becoming so complicated and so diverse in the ecosystems of supply chain, vendors, technology enablement, service chain integration. It's not as straightforward at all, and it does take a village to actually make it happen. I believe that in terms of the value that third parties and systems integrators like WWT and OEMs like Dell can bring to the equation is actually how we can make that complexity simpler to the consumer. So things that we are doing already for our service provider customers in the US and also in the UK and EMEA is leveraging one of the things that we do have. We didn't talk about much here about our Advanced Technology Center. We have $500 million of a lab. It's 4 data centers spread, 300 racks of loads of infrastructure. It's purely dedicated for technology enablement, complex solution validations, and things that are required, difficult things that need to be done. So the outcomes that are, again, better efficiencies, elasticity, economies of scale, in the platforms, these are all mitigated by leveraging that sort of footprint. So the Advanced Technology Center is really this place where we believe that we can help our customers to not only further validate quicker those complexities, these integrations, but equally on the back end, we do have more than 3 million square feet facilities around the globe for rapid rack and stack and supply chain integration. So it's this complexities not only from a software perspective, but also from a physical integration perspective that are required for the edge, that I believe WWT can bring a lot on support to our telco customers.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, the sad thing about these podcasts where you have such interesting and wide-ranging conversations is you always run out of time. That's why we set ourselves time limit at the start. Otherwise, we'd just go on forever, wouldn't we? So that was really enjoyable, guys. It was great speaking to both you, Daniel, and you, Eric. And we'll wrap this one up here, but we'll also thank you to the audience for listening. And make sure you join us for the next one, which we're going to be recording quite soon, which is where we're going to drill down a little bit more into the concept of partnerships and what that means for telcos. So make sure you join us for that one.